Sentire Media.
It is the 9th of May, 1978. For the past 55 days, all of Italy has held its breath. The two existing television channels, the radio and the newspapers, seem to be able to speak of nothing else. Indeed, for the last 55 days, the president of the main Italian party at the time, the Christian Democrats, Aldo Moro, has been a captive of the far-left terrorist organization known as the Brigate Rosse, the Red Brigades. The previous 55 days have been a series of communications from the terrorists, a raging debate whether to negotiate with them or not, and most recently, since the Red Brigades saw the action as a trial against the state, Aldo Moro has been officially condemned to death. Everything had started on the 16th of March, and you could say that it started with a flower seller. Indeed, flower seller Antonio Spiriticchio started that day like any other. He went to get his van, which he would then drive over to the corner of Via Fani and Via Stresa, park and sell his flowers from his van. The morning of the 16th of March, 1978 started with a nasty surprise. His tires had been slashed. It had happened a couple of days before. One of his tires had been slashed. He had managed to fix it and be on time on his corner for work. This time round, however, all 4 tires had been slashed. There was no hope of Antonio getting to work on time that day. It was almost as if somebody had purposely not wanted him to be on that corner on that day. And indeed, that was the case. That was the corner which had been chosen by the Red Brigades to kidnap Aldo Moro. As the president's motorcade pulled into the road, a girl standing on the corner with a bunch of flowers gave a signal and left on a scooter. That was the signal for the lead car to pull in ahead of the motorcade. And as they reached the corner of Via Fani and Via Stresa, the car stopped. A group of 4 men on the corner, dressed as Alitalia pilots, then took the machine guns out of the bags they were holding, and all hell broke loose. In a matter of seconds, all 5 members of Aldo Moro's escort had been killed. Aldo Moro himself had been bundled into a car and sped off. He was then taken to his place of captivity, a hidden room inside an apartment which had been made especially for him. Thus started the 55 days of the agonizing wait. They would end on the 9th of May, when the lifeless body of Aldo Moro would be found in a red Renault 4 in Via Caetani, halfway between the headquarters of the Christian Democrat Party and the Communist Party, the message being that the blame lay squarely on the shoulders of the two parties. It was the end of the life of the statesman Aldo Moro, but it was not the end of the affair. The obstructions of justice which had started the very day of the kidnapping continued for years. The potential people involved included members of the secret neo-fascist Propaganda 2, P2 Masonic Lodge, the mafia, secret services, and other parts of the state. The echoes of the Aldo Moro affair resound through Italian history to this very day. Before we start, a word from our sponsor. This special episode is brought to you by Brush. Brush is an electric toothbrush that will change the way you think about brushing your teeth. With powerful sonic technology and ultra-gentle brushes, the brush redefines what it means to have super clean teeth. It's like that feeling when you just leave the dentist. A fresh, whole mouth, clean, every single day, and without having to fork out all that money for the dentist. Our listeners get 15% off their total purchase with code POD15. Follow the link in the show notes and enter the code POD15, that's POD15, to get your exclusive discount and upgrade your oral care routine. Then you too can say, I'm going to brush my teeth. That's brush spelled B-R-U with the funny dots, the umlaut, U-S-H. Today, to talk about the Moro affair, I have invited my friend Lorenzo Paluan, a graduate of political science, ex-local councillor, and a scholar of the whole Moro affair and Italian politics in general. Lorenzo, thank you very much for coming on today.
Very honored to be here, and it's a real pleasure to take part in your podcast.
Okay, so first of all, Lorenzo, on a personal level, the Moro affair for Italians is one of those historical events like 9/11 and like the Kennedy assassination, obviously with a totally different impact. But it's one of those things, one of those situations in which Italians who were alive at the time remember exactly where they were, what they were doing, and what happened. Can you tell us something about your memories about when everything started? So the 16th of March, 1978.
Yes, I was a student at elementary school, 3rd grade, that's correct, during classroom, and I remember that at maybe 11:30, the bidello, the janitor,
Yes, exactly.
came into class and whispered something in the ear of my teacher, and I saw my teacher very worried about it. We understand that something big was happening, but nobody knows. Then maybe at 1 p.m. back home, and at that time there was only 2 channels on public TV,
Yes.
and we start to know about it, the Viafani
Attack. Yeah.
attack.
So the story of Aldo Moro is in great part a story of the BR, the Red Brigades. Lorenzo, tell us something about this organization, please.
The Red Brigades were the prominent terroristic organization in the 70s and the early 80s in Italy. They were maybe a real menace for the state, but we can try to identify at least 3 periods in the history of Red Brigade. At the beginning, early 70s, there was some, in a certain sense, of the discontent of part of Communist Party. There were some militant of the juvenile organization of Communist Party, part from a lot of different movement born from 68 contestation.
Yes, the protests and the movement of
and
1968.
there was a lot of organization, Marxist, Leninist, that were quite disappointed about the role of Communist Party in Italy as institutional way to reach some achievement for working class and democracy in a situation that was objective, oppressive for a lot of
workers, of factory workers,
in
agricultural
university,
workers.
and there was a state very oppressive, and most of them feared that Italy was going on a sort of Chile way as the end of the Allende government.
Yeah.
In that years, part of this movement started thinking that the Republic Constitution was being betrayed. They think that they was the heir of the partisan war of resistance during the Second World War. They starting to shoot with something gun. Maybe the Franceschini, one of the founder of BR, said that the first gun was a gun of a partisan.
Yeah, the resistance, and that's one of the things.
There were some gun and some weapon still
hidden during the war, exactly.
Yes, after the war.
So many partisans
at the beginning there was this mythology of to restart the resistance war because it was being betrayed by the institutional role of Communist Party in the Republic. And they were idealistic in a certain sense. For the first year, they have this politics of propaganda armata.
So armed propaganda.
Yeah. And they didn't kill anyone, but they commit crimes.
They would kneecap them. In Italian, we use the term gambizzato, so shoot them in the knees, basically.
Yes, and some kidnap. Demonstrative for some hour. They kidnapped the director of the big plant of one of the factory in Milan or Torino.
But also for financial reasons, because, for example, the cost...
For financial reasons, there was some robbery and this kind. So they were crimes at all effect, but they didn't start yet
with killing.
Yes. Then in 1974, the first founder of Red Brigades were captured by police, and a new leadership take the lead in the organization, and they were more extremistic and very oriented to a real armed insurrection. They were convinced that Italy was on the edge of insurrection, of a revolution. And they had just to start.
They had to lead this revolution.
Yes.
And indeed, the Moro killing, in a certain sense, could be seen as a reaction of the Red Brigades to the trials against the founders, in a certain sense.
Yes, the founders were captured 2 years before. And so, yes, you can read the Morocco kidnapping like this, but it's a very more complicated history, because all the Moro kidnapping is full of mystery. How the investigation going, and it was also, there is a lot of mystery also to the organization of the attack itself, because it was the very first military operation also for the armed faction of the Red Brigades, that maybe they have some experience in shooting to a single person along the road, unionist, magistrates, policemen, but that was, and this is the reason why everything that was alive at that time, remember the Vivace attack, it was a very military operation. And it was the last one.
Because the first and last.
The first and the last, because after that, Red Brigade go on with killings, but always on single person, without armed escorts, with a low profile of protection by institution.
And you mentioned, Lorenzo, that the investigation into the kidnapping and killing of Moro was one of the big mysteries and big issues. Can you tell us something about the investigation into the Moro affair?
Yes, maybe we have to try to say some word about the political institution at that time. The point is that the government was led by Christian Democratic Party. That was the same party of Aldo Moro, and
he was the secretary of the party.
He was the president.
The president.
And the point is that the institution at that time were very committed with a sort of extra political organization and influence, like Masonic association, secret association named P2, and is a fact.
Which stood for Propaganda Due.
Propaganda Due, yes. It was Masonic, I don't know.
Masonic
Lodge.
Lodge, exactly,
Masonic Lodge. This Masonic Lodge was an organization with the aim of try to consolidate the rules of executive power and in some way try to limit the freedom of association, the circulation of information, so free press, these kind of things. It was an association very connected with a lot of reality, politics,
industry, journalism,
armies. There was a lot of members of this association in all main.
Yes, in all the nodes of the network, in all the tangles of the web.
There was a lot of people with high roles in all Italian institutions connected to this secret association. And it is a matter of fact that Francesco Cossiga was the interior minister. At that time, and it's a matter of fact that the 16th of March, somehow after the kidnapping, he set out a sort of technical commission with the role to support the internal ministry in his action, and it was all composed by P2 members.
Okay.
all. And I mean, the misdirection of
the investigation.
The investigation started
starting from the very day,
from the 16th of March.
So the misleading and then
a lot of misleading. Sometimes funny if it wasn't a tragedy.
Tragic comic, if you will.
Yes,
typically
I mean,
Italian.
there was the psychologist in this commission that after reading the first Moro letters that Red Brigade
published or circulated,
this psychology traced the profile of Moro as a victim of Stockholm syndrome, because what he wrote, it was too much to support to bear from the political of that time.
So the investigations started to go astray or started to be misled from the very first moment of the kidnapping, basically, with a whole series of events that we could talk about for days, probably. Another big point which sort of was considered scandalous for some people at the time, or let's say a controversial point of the whole Moro affair, was the refusal of the state to negotiate with the Red Brigades for the life of Aldo Moro. Can you tell us something about that, Lorenzo?
Yes. It was a very difficult question for a moral point of view from honest politics that were in parliament at that time, but the point is that Communist Party was the most committed to a non-negotiation approach.
So to not negotiate. The Communist Party was for non-negotiation.
Yes. They were in some sense obliged to this kind of decision because negotiate with the Red Brigades in a certain way would be
to legitimize
them, yes,
and also perhaps
to accept the fact that the institutional and democratic way to socialism and that Communist Party chose in 1945 was the wrong way to reach a sort of social justice for Italy.
And also it would have set a dangerous precedent to negotiate in that moment, would have maybe opened to further action by other terrorist organizations or the BR themselves.
So communists were communist in the sense of Communist Party of Italy was blocked by this political consideration. Other ways, Christian Democrat Party, it's a more tricky situation. I mean, there was obviously also some men of institution with the same motivation of Communist Party, that you can legitimate terrorism, and it's understandable. Okay, at the same time, and this is also the reason of this enormous number of misleadings during investigation, there was a part of Christian Democrat parties that saw the Moro kidnapping as the occasion to stop really dangerous political operation that Moro are going to build in that time. It was the historic compromise,
yes,
the possibility that Christian Democratic Party and the Communist Party rule together and recognize government role to communist that it was very not appreciated by also by all NATO allies at the time. Yeah. First of all, United States, and in Kissinger, before the kidnapping, it seems that have a very hard conversation with Moro about this question. Anyway, Moro was convinced that the only way to try a sort of exit from social turmoils and contestation, manifestation, and violence and political violence in the 70s was that the most important popular parties cooperate.
Yeah. We have to remember that in Italian history, those years in the late 70s were known as the anni di piombo, the years of lead. So not only left-wing terrorism, but also right-wing fascist terrorism. It was a time, a very violent time in Italy, in which we almost lived in a semi-police state. You know, checks and roadblocks were a daily thing that people had to deal with. A group of young men standing for too long in an area in a city would have been immediately questioned by the police. So they were trying to get out of a period, as you said correctly, Lorenzo, of great political turmoil with what was known as the compromesso storico, so the historical compromise. And you mentioned before, Lorenzo, that you briefly mentioned Moro's letters. And there were many, many letters written by Moro during his 55 days as a prisoner of the Brigate Rosse, the 55 days between his kidnapping on the 16th of March and then his killing on the 9th of May. And so tell us something about some of the mysteries and about those letters, Lorenzo.
It's also a very complicated history. I mean, from the first weeks, Red Brigade start to publish a sort of verbal of the popular court. They call it the Tribunale Popolare, popular court to judge the Moro crimes against working class and so on. And at the same time, they allow Moro to write some letter to party members.
To various
and
party
to
colleagues.
The family, yes. At the end of his captivity, also to the Pope. And this
do we know what he wrote to the Pope?
Yes, yes. These letters are public. Letters are public. At the same time, we know that, in fact, Moro has only way to spend his time in captivity was to write. So he write a lot of notes and lot of letters, and most part of that we never have direct access. Only a few months later, in November 1978, man of Generale della Chiesa, who was the one who lead the operation against terrorism, he was in fact who the one that
He has the merit of
the
defeating,
merit of defeating, yes, the
terrorism,
one
yeah.
who defeating the military part of Red Brigades.
He managed to defeat the Red Brigades, but unfortunately he was abandoned and then defeated himself by the mafia.
Exactly, some years later, and but anyway, the point is, only in November, men of Generale della Chiesa in Milan, in hideout in apartment in Via Gradoli.
Yeah.
In Milan, they found a bunch of letters and notes, and it was also this discovery was quite strange.
Yes,
There is a lot of strange information about this hideout, terrorist hideout,
Yes.
and the way that these letters came out.
And there's a suspicion that some were hidden because they had sort of content that would have caused some trouble for high-profile political
so
leaders.
We know only that Red Brigade and Italian Secret Service one that we know about Moro letter, and this is a fact because at the same time, only 20 years later, always in the same apartment. During some restoration works, they found another pile of notes and letter of Moro affair. The point is that all these documents were typed. So in any case, there were letters and notes that terrorists or someone else rewrite. And even if they could be considered truly original, probably was not the complete series of the Moro note written during his prison.
So to understand, Moro would write his letters by hand, and they were then typed up by the members of the organization.
Yes, that's the point. So this is the reason why we know only that they want that we know about it. And there was a lot of handling on Moro note.
Things passed through a lot of hands before they
Yes.
reached the public, let's say.
Yes. All this misleading, all these mysteries, all these strange events connected to the attack and the kidnapping, in a certain way, my personal opinion is a quite quite wide opinion, quite common opinion, were all linked exactly to the fact that Moro was trying a very dangerous path for United States.
So the historical
NATO,
compromise.
Yes, the historical compromise was something too big to manage, and. In fact, the founders of Red Brigade, Franceschini, from his prison, in this case, official prison. Yes, he was in prison.
Institutional prison.
Exactly, institutional prison. He was in prison from 1974, so he never took part at this plot. But in different occasions, he said that he's not very sure for whom they worked.
Okay, so for who the BR were? So,
Yes, because it's clear that during the attack, that was a very professional military attack, couldn't be made only by 10 terrorists. That there was the 10 accused and imprisoned in the 80s.
Who were not military, ex-military, they were not trained...
Part of terrorists, as I said, were just people who going shot some round against trees in the mountains as a training, as a military training. That commando was very well armed. Sure, there was some of these brigadiers, these terrorists, but in the years there was a lot of information about other people that was before or after the cars of Moro and his escort, and they never really made clear who was all these armed people in this situation. They're talking about two armed people in a Honda, in a motorcycle. They shoot one of the people that was just
a bystander.
bystander during the attack. That was very, very, very rapid, very efficient. Around 100
rounds
shot. 5 policemen dead, and Moro without
a scratch. Oh.
And this is something to think about.
It's a highly effective job, a highly effective attack in that sense.
From people that till now just shooting to one single person.
Usually
without
and the terrorists testified also that they had very little. I mean, also Italy was not a place at the time where you could go and train to use a machine gun anywhere. I mean, if somebody found out that you were training with a machine gun somewhere, they would have arrested you very quickly.
Yes, so there was also this mythology about training camp in Palestine or in Libya. Very unlikely. The point is that this was the top of the action of this organization by a military point of view, and they never acted like this.
They never acted like that after. And so what about the consequences, Lorenzo? You mentioned before that obviously people were arrested, people were tried and convicted for the Moro killing. What were the consequences for those involved? And maybe the consequences not only for those who actually performed the attack, but also those connected, those involved on both sides, also on a political level.
Okay, allora, practical consequences at the beginning of the 80s, in fact, the protagonists of this period of Red Brigades were all captured. Mario Moretti was the leader of the army fraction
of the Roman section of the because we're talking about
Valerio Morucci was another quite complicated figure in this history because it was a terrorist with a strange social extraction, and it was one of most exalted for
one of those exaggerated extremist
in toward the use of the weapon in a political struggle. Anyway, 10 terrorists were convicted. Part of them never dissociated totally from terroristic organization. In fact, in 1987, both Franceschini and Moretti said that Lotta Armata,
the armed struggle,
the armed struggle was
had ended.
Had ended, and this was a sort of manifesto, but from the prison, where they said that the war was finished, but still some terrorists in certain cities, Milan, Naples, continue to make different kind of attack, robbery, and these kind of things. And this is a sort of third phase of the history of Red Brigade. So the historical reader are both the first and the second group were captured, and then there was this remains of terroristic organization. They still make victims, also in the 80s, also at the end of the 90s, the first 2000 with the D'Antona and Marco Biagi killing.
Okay. So you mentioned before the figure of Dalla Chiesa, General Dalla Chiesa. We did an episode on him as an anti-mafia martyr. So he obviously was an important member of the armed forces. What about the role of other members of the armed forces, of the army and the police in the Moro affair?
It's very difficult to try to separate the role of the heads of police and army during this crisis from a certain kind of suspect due to the P2 history and how many of them were involved in this kind of secret association that in idealistic version have to be the Atlantic point of view against the communism, and in a more truly way was just another criminal association dedicated to political institution than the control of the territory as a mafia. And it was a very dangerous organization, and still, as Italy, we still pay some of this action in that period, because differently from the communist terrorism, the black terrorism that we mentioned before has never been cleared.
So, for example, we could think about the bomb in Bologna.
The bombing in Bologna, Piazza
attack.
Fontana, starting from the 60s in this case.
And
from,
the Piazza
Piazza Fontana, Piazza della Loggia in Brescia. And in a certain way, some of the red terrorists said that it was a reaction from the fascist terrorism, but it also called terrorismo di Stato,
State
terrorism. Exactly because a lot of this bombing and other criminal events were covered by, in a certain way, pieces of Secret Service and armed force in Italy. And this is not a theory. This has been cleared during the trials for Strage di Bologna and
the Bologna killing and
so on.
I mean, also we must remember that in Italy there were actual far right-wing plans at high state levels for a coup, for a military coup, the Piano Solo, for example, which we could do another episode about.
Yes, it's not the fear of a coup as in Chile. People really had fear that Italy could fall in a situation like
in Chile.
In Chile.
Yeah, because we had the example of 73 with the Pinochet's takeover.
That was the year. And at the same time, as we mentioned, there were trials also on black terrorism, but they never reached a real truth about the mandanti.
About those who organized the organizers.
Because they were too close to part of the state. And this is a black spot in history of our democracy. And it's still living, because if you, as for the JFK killing, if you're not able to clarify, also historically, not only by the way of trials and this kind of thing, but if you are not clear the responsibility level in your state organization, probably they reached their objective.
Thanks very much to everyone for listening. I really hope you found that interview interesting. If you would like to know more about the Moro affair, remember you can get in touch. hello@ahistoryofitaly.com. At the same URL, ahistoryofitaly.com, you can click through to our social media and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, or you can go to the support page and become a Patreon supporter and have access to extra content. Once again, thanks very much to everyone for listening, and until next time, arrivederci.
C'è un tempo per ogni destino, è un tempo di ogni illusione, ma il tempo scandito dal sole ci lascia senza parole. Il tempo scandito dal sole ci lascia senza parole. Il tempo scandito dal sole ci lascia senza parole.
Sentire Media.
Hey, podcast producers and show hosts. Do you want to join a podcast network that celebrates all things Italian? At Sentire Media, we understand the allure of Italy and its unique culture. Our devoted team of hosts and producers are all driven by their shared passion for Italy. And we work tirelessly to create the best lifestyle podcasts and content that will whisk you away to the very heart of Italy. With us, you can savor the mouth-watering flavors, get lost in the stories from the past, break down the cultural barriers, and truly immerse yourself in the vibrant traditions of this intoxicating country. If you have a great podcast idea or are already in production and would like to join Sentire Media, head over to sentiremedia.com, that's SENTIRE media.com, and find out how to submit your show.